Okay, we're recording. Can you see the slides?
I can see them.
Okay, great. Okay, just as earlier today, we started with the fact that this is going to be recording. Presentation will be available after the 25th. FAQs for this will also be posted after March 1st, 7 days before April 3rd at the latest. We'll just do quick introductions to see who's attending. Is in presentation that will allow me to get through maybe a few of the slides a little faster for today. And state staff in the room, we've got me and Matt Williams. Okay, let's start over here.
You forgot to.
No, I didn't see that. All right, please.
Patty Mendoza, Iowa Valley. Cinta Lake in Channel, Northeast Iowa.
Steve Carson, Eastern Iowa. Dutch Schneider, Eastern Iowa.
Rachel Packer, Eastern Iowa. Stephen Duke, Concord, or Iowa, Concord.
And Frank.
Mariah Oliver, Nathan Tyler, Community College, and Reese Henry, NCC.
You can call Natalie. You'll learn that.
Acting at Community College, Martha Bell, Southeastern, and Hall, Southeastern. Spring, and Crystal.
Okay, thank you for joining us today as we go through the funding opportunity that's associated with Adult Education and Family Literacy Act, Section 243, the Integrated English Literacy and Civics Education. Today we'll go through the funding associated with it through WIOA. We'll also talk about the applicant eligibility. We'll talk about what Section 243 means, what the allowable and required activities are associated with that. We'll talk a little bit about the project scope, the cost proposal, Iowa grants, and we'll go as fast or as slow as you might have questions related to that. With Section 243, you are still looking at being able to provide equitable access to the funding opportunity. We are still, because this is a separate funding application, it is open to all the same candidates that would be receiving 231, but the process is separate because we recognize that there might be providers that are interested in just doing this type of activity and not everything that's associated with 231. So for the purpose of that, I always continue to keep these as two separate grants. The good thing is a lot of the information that you've collected, maybe in applying for 231, you can reuse. So today's conversation will focus on just 243 funds. Priorities of funding is, again, to address those with low literacy needs, serving those with barriers to employment, and making sure that our services are aligned with activities with the four partners, our one-stop partners. Workforce activities. Those that are applying or intended to apply should be familiar with the law, the regulations associated with that, as well as Iowa standards, policies, and codes. So we went over those extensively this morning. The timeline is the same. The application is very similar in regards to the three components that are required. The eligible applicant, eligible provider form associated with that, the proposed project, and Section 3, which is the cost proposal. Again, this is a funding proposal that is for allowable to be renewed up to 4 times, so a total of 5 years for a grant cycle for the IELCE. So we aren't looking at having this up for renewal anytime before the 231 funds. So this would be something that we would look at maintaining for the 5 years. We've covered information related to WIOA. We encourage you to be familiar because the requirements there are the same that you are aligned with, and these applications will be reviewed by your local workforce development board. So being familiar with the other titles, being familiar with how their activities align with the purpose of this grant is going to be important. Let's see. I collapsed some of the purposes here with AEFLA because under IEFLA, a lot of the focus around here is serving those that are immigrants, serving those that have English language acquisition needs. So that's the bulk of the purpose related to this. And you'll see that as we talk about the required elements associated with IEFLA. I've also included here for your records, again, the goals and vision related to the Unified State Plan. Determining applicant eligibility. This is very similar to if you were an applicant for Section 231. You need to demonstrate not only are you an eligible provider, but can you demonstrate prior effectiveness? 2 years worth of data is required. So if you filled out Appendix C already, you'd be able to use that level of documentation for your application here. You would also need to include contact information related to your authorized signature, your grant manager or your coordinator that will be overseeing your IEFLA, as well as your fiscal contact. Those organizations are eligible to apply. The list is long, and we talked a little bit about consortiums. So if you do have a consortium or you're looking to partner, because with the IEFLA, you're looking at having a partner with an IET program, both of you will need to demonstrate effectiveness. If it's not effective to do an application that way, then you might want to make sure that it's a sub-award agreement that you're looking at, not a consortium. So having those type of conversations early on with a partner, especially if you're looking at an IEFLA and another entity is going to do that workforce training and they think that they're a partner in this and they would prefer to have a consortium, you need to be able to talk to them about being able to demonstrate past effectiveness and what does that look like, and being able to submit the appropriate documentation for that, because that will be necessary to have that application reviewed. They need to be able to demonstrate that and show that. If they can't, then the alternative is to look at, is there a sub-award agreement that both partners can agree to where the work is still getting done? Does that make sense, the difference between a sub-award agreement and a consortium application? Great. We've talked a little bit about demonstrated past effectiveness and the tables associated with that. You're either filling out Table 1 because you're a prior provider of adult education, or you're filling out Table 2 because you didn't provide activities related to that, but it's still intended to collect the information about the services that you provided to the target population, those with low levels of literacy, those that are ESL, and whether or not you provided improvements in reading, writing, math. Okay. That's not the right slide for this, so. Application review. This is the first stage of the pre-screening. They need to be able to pass this stage. before any consideration beyond that for your proposed project or your cost proposal. Any questions so far about IELCE? You're going to find that the grant packet itself is very similar to what you might have looked at. There's fewer appendixes, so the lettering of the appendixes don't always align if you're looking between 231 and 243. So be careful of that. Yeah, it's a little shorter because again you don't have the correction section 225 in it. So try to make it shorter. You take out the appendixes, I mean that's like 40 pages right there anyway. So eligible services and allowable activities with IELCE. Okay. Again, the purpose is to serve those that are in need and eligible as participants. So they need to be qualified as eligible participants for services under WIOA. And the intent of the program for 243 is to prepare adults who are English language learners for and place such adults in unsubsidized employment in in-demand industries that leads to economic self-sufficiency and integrate with the local workforce development system and its functions to carry out the activities of the program. So this is a little bit of a different focus that you have for this than if we were talking about 231, the IELCE activity. So that's why there's a distinction, and that these funds and the use of these funds is really targeted that the program has to meet all of the required elements of it before those funds can be expended. So we've had several conversations about that with the Fed, that this burden of having the program have all of those activities is high. So it's really hard for programs to say, yes, I'm going to do an IELCE. And there's some states that are struggling in getting these funds awarded and getting these funds spent, just because of the burden. I would say that we're really close to being on the cusp of that, because of that burden that is there. Related is that the IELCE is in combination with integrated education and training activity. This isn't like 231 where it may be, and it's okay if it is. This one is it must be connected to an IEP. So our ready programs know how hard an IEP is to have all of those moving parts, concurrent single set of objectives, and now you're adding into it other elements of civics education, English language acquisition, that has to be there. So again, we've highlighted the program must be designed for these purposes. To give you sort of a visualization there of what the different components of IELCE are and how they need to be. Again, it's hard to visualize this without thinking that it's stacked, because it's not stacked. It's occurring concurrently. So it needs to show that all of these pieces is a program. It's a program of study. It's not first you do this, then you do this, then you might move into an IEP. It's that all of this is combined into one, which again makes this a difficult program to kind of wrap one's head around. Some of the components are there. We've already talked about what that means. English language acquisition are those skill sets that are linked to ELP standards. Civics education related to adult citizen standards. Workforce preparation activities linked to 21st century skills. also inclusive of digital literacy. And then we have the IET component there. So again, all of these activities are crammed into one program. And that program then needs to be aligned to a career pathway that's in an in-demand area. So you might have a program of IELCE that's healthcare. You might have a program of IELCE that's manufacturing, transportation and logistics. So it is possible to have multiple programs, but all of those elements need to exist within that program for this funding opportunity. And we again included a chart of what IET needs to include. That's the biggest change, if you will, between the funding, is what that covers. We'll go through how much funding that is, how that funding is allocated, because there's differences associated with that. The narratives are very similar, although their focus is, again, on what is the need for English language learners in your proposed area. What is your regional need for employment sectors? What does that look like? Why did you select that particular sector to provide an IELT program in? What triggered that? What was the tipping point to say that was where we needed this particular training at? And then, of course, you'll be detailing how you've incorporated all of these into that single program, so that there's no question that the funds are being used for an allowable IELT program. I think that's where we might have hit a snag, where different parts of an IELT might be functioning, but as a program as a whole, it might have been missing a piece or something related to that. For the use of these funds, they're very clear that that entire program must meet the determination that it's an IELTE program and has all of those pieces in place for those 243 funds to be expended on. Do you have a comment?
Yeah, just in addition that also that's potential, it's on the job training. I have actually so valuable to
Whoever's talking, could you just get a little closer to the mic?
Sure, Carla. The comment was shared by Mike that in the IEP element and the workforce training piece, it's important to make sure that that's an industry recognized credential that leads to that employment, leads to that moving for unsubsidized work. While there's many of those activities that they could do for workforce training, if they are doing a further training or to look at, is this industry recognized? Is this going to be leading towards the purpose of the IELTE, which is for them to be in unsubsidized employment and in an industry of demand, in need? Was that Laura?
For sure that something is that in the student. I mean, most I don't have any thoughts. CBO, CNA, CNC, anything that has a third-party test or accreditation attached to it that's outside the community college would really probably be the best definition for an industry recognized credential. Welding, those types of things, carpentry, pipe fitting, all of those have their own standard pieces set aside other than what the community college would offer as certification in that specific industry.
So information that you can gather from your sector partnerships. So if you've got a sector partnership that is formed around transportation and logistics, those businesses would know what is a industry recognized credential for them. They would know that, hey, 6 out of 10 of them would hire someone that had this credential. So therefore that type of credential would be something that's being recognized in that area of employment.
So what we found, for instance, like, OSHA certification does not necessarily rise to the level of an industry recognized credential. Wound care, those types of things, while they're great for the portfolio, great for the resume, a piece of that IT or that IELCE that leads them to a greater certification, they don't necessarily satisfy the industry recognized credential.
Right. Mike, can you talk a little more about incumbent OJT and how that might be applicable to the ELC process?
I think
because
you got a good.
Yeah,
You're
for incumbents, they're not necessarily working toward a certification, but they're engaged in training that is directly applicable to their work site.
right, and it's going to lead to further employment,
Right.
greater employment.
Right.
Therefore, there's no need to have an industry recognized credentials because they're already employed. The idea is that you're providing those civics pieces of it, the language acquisition piece, and any other adult basic ed portions of that, including those work skills that they're going to so desperately need because they don't have it. And you're basically providing that service to the employer to create that ideal employee that they're looking for.
Okay.
That way you're looking for.
Yep.
Okay.
This is Carla. So I just want to restate that to make sure I understand. So if it's like you called it an incumbent OJT program, I think, or an earn and learn. So if the workers are, if the students, I should say, are actually employed by an employer or they're hired on their new, and they're going to go through a program of study, like an IELCE program, then potentially that credential piece isn't required because they are doing OJT type activities that are very specific to the industry, as long as we have those other pieces wrapped in, like civics, language, etc.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay.
And then too, important to realize and note that there are limitations that adult education funds have on supporting the stipends or funds for an on-the-job training. So we've gone round and round about how other titles might have more flexibility and the use of that to help support the on-the-job training, help support an employer in that. Title II does not have that. So again, partnerships support that creative element of having OJTs or other workforce training opportunities. Other questions? Okay. Proposal submission requirements. Yeah.
So, as look at over section 43, we set out a pre-planned template, which most of you have gone over, don't fulfill this and complete this. We're going to tweak it for the third quarter, just because that way I don't have to make a phone call or email back to you. What is the IET? What is the certification? And then just verifying that the career pathways is in the summer that we can find it. So those are the three things we didn't think about putting in there. But then when we received these, not that I couldn't tell what idea was, but it's kind of questionable exactly what idea IELTS is. So this has been a good piece, and I appreciate the hard work everyone has done putting this in. For third quarter, it'll be a little more complete, and I probably won't have to go back and forth if it doesn't apply too much.
So when will we receive the updated form?
I could send it now, but I didn't want to kind of get people thrown off of where we were with, some negotiated several back, pushed them on to Alex yet. I know he hasn't had a chance to really review the documentation that we have, and Teresa's been looking at some of the documentation as well, so give us another month, and then I'll send it out, so we're free and clear from that work. Okay.
Did you hear that, Carla?
Yes. Yep. I think I'm good.
Okay. All right, so proposal submission requirements. The same rules apply with how this needs to be submitted. PDF is preferred. The narratives have 5,000 character limits for the text area boxes. We don't accept additional attachments or documentation, so it won't be considered part of the application. If you do, the structure of the grant is the same as well. It's framed around the 6 program standards that adult education has. Again, your focus in responding to those questions is really the thing that will change. So when you're looking again at program design and leadership, and you're looking at and you're responding to accessibility, you're talking more about how is this program going to be accessible to those that speak 20 different languages, as opposed to how is this going to be accessible to, you're also considering what is a regional need. So you're looking at, again, the more in line with what is the labor market information for your region. So another way to know that this is in demand is by looking at, well, how many positions have hired for this? How many, what's the forecast for this type of work in my region? Would I be off base in planning for, I don't know, drillers in my area when we don't have that industry? So what makes sense for for us to provide training in? The proposed project, so this is section 2 of the grant. Again, you're looking at providing the information that's related to how are you going to do the IELCE program. So when you're talking about personnel list, if you are going to have instructors that we're funding with 231 to also assist with this, because the funds are so limited here to do IELCE, and the bulk of it might have to go towards the IET piece of it, include them in this list and say, yes, the bulk of the personnel list are also going to be ones that are engaged doing ELA over here, but they are going to be serving our IELCE participants. So we might have 20 or 30 participants over the course of the year, but they're going to be worked with other participants in other programs. So also looking at your program schedule. So we're looking at having an IELCE and manufacturing that will be held at this site for the spring, and one for the summer, and one for the fall. So that kind of information is what would go into your first narrative 1 of 6, program design and leadership. When we're talking about curriculum, instruction, and professional development, again, it's going to be important to focus in on that curriculum that's related to the IELCE and how you're making sure that the English language proficiency standards are being addressed. You're going to want to make sure that you're highlighting how those IET elements that you're incorporating into it are contextualized with the instruction that you're providing. So again, your frame of thought when you're applying for this application, even though you're going to see it's asking specifically, how is this being done for the IELCE individual? So consider who you're going to be serving with this grant. Same with the participant experience. When an IELCE participant or an adult education individual walks through the door, at what stage do you begin to identify them as a candidate for the IELCE program? What assessments or what counseling is provided to them to lead them to enrolling into the IELCE program? What triggers that as, okay, we're saying that we're going to serve 20, 30 students. What is it that makes this student one of those 20 or 30 students that you're going to serve? Is it something that's based on their CASA scores, something based upon their goals, their identified career pathway? Help us understand how you're going to identify those learners that you're going to engage in these activities. And how are they accessing the services? What's being done to remove those barriers that they might have to be successful in the IELCE program? The IELCE program might be a little bit longer. It might be more intensive. It might have more expectations because, again, if you're blending all of these things and you're requiring them to get either through an OJT or through an industry credential, what's being done to help them to be successful in that? What resources might come to bear? What can they access to get support if they fall behind, if they struggle? How is your program equipped to address that? Accountability. Again, your program will be responsible for the program and outcomes, also making sure that data is being stored and reported accurately for these participants, both in TE as well as MIS, because if they are working on industry credentials, we need to make sure that they're being coded correctly in that area as well. And as a program, if you're a provider for this, are you financially viable to be able to offer this program, this grant? Again, we're looking at those community partnerships because we know that IELCE as a program is very difficult to manage on your own. There needs to be those partnerships. One, because there's limitations on what we can fund, and there's limitations on funding in general for this activity, and there's a lot of things that go into this activity. So what are those efforts for partnerships and coordination of services? This is where either you're participating on with Title I, and Title I's helping, you're partnering with Goodwill or other providers that have resources to help with the training elements. What does that partnership and coordination of services look like? There's still that responsibility if you're a provider that you might not be providing 231 and you're just providing 243, to be partnering with one-stops, to be partnering with core partners. If you're already a 231 provider, most of these duties will already be covered with 231, but if you're only applying for Section 243 funds, we need to make sure that you're aware of the responsibilities that are part of being an adult education provider and working with one-stop centers. So that finishes on part 2 of the grant application, and then part 3 is related to the cost proposal. Any questions?
On page 16, it is saying that I do have to use the teaching approach, either co-teaching or alternating teaching. I just want to clarify that we do, for IELCE, we do have to have 2 instructors.
Again, it's subject matter experts. So that alternating teaching could be done based upon, I mean, if you've got a teacher that's a subject matter expert in English language proficiency and the CNA training, that would be considered that team teaching.
Okay.
If there is a need, none of that indicates that it has to be 2 people in the classroom at the same time. But it does indicate that there needs to be a level of subject matter expert between that. So if it's the same person that can do both, that's fine. If it can't be, then it needs to be the subject matter that they're alternating. Okay, sure. Okay, cost proposal is going to be, again, similar to what was reviewed earlier. It's important to follow the guidelines of Uniform Guidance and EDGAR. This is a reimbursement grant, so claims and the documentation necessary for claims is critical. Also, end-of-year report, making sure that all documentation and the use of the funds is allowable, allocable, reasonable, and necessary. Again, the funds are not intended to supplant, they need to supplement other funds. And again, with the limitations of the funds, you're going to see that there is a need to supplement. This does have the same level of match requirement. So if you are receiving Section 243 funds, these can't be matched against with federal funds. They have to be matched against with state or local funds. Time and effort reporting. So because this is a separate grant and a separate budget, if someone is receiving 243 funds, you're going to have to record that as a separate line item in your time and effort. So if they are teaching ELA in the morning, but they're doing 243 class in the afternoon, that should be tracked separately.
But if they're only doing this,
You still need to do time and effort sheets, but it would only be for 243 funds. This has the same cap that we discussed about administrative expenses and what those administrative expenses are allowable for. Also has the same process of negotiating for a higher percentage, up to 15% for them. Instructional expenditures include, again, salary, instructional material assessments, professional development. Also could include what we talked about for the workforce training. So if there's a separate contract that you have doing the workforce training, then that would be captured in line 406 to say that those fees are going for training fees. You have a budget narrative. It's I didn't actually get around to putting dollar amounts in there, but those are the same. You would be able to provide information for your proposed budget. And when looking at proposed budget, this isn't allocated. Appendix A is not your distribution by county. Appendix A, I believe, is your distribution of potential participants in ESL. So I think for Appendix A and 243, Dan pulled for me from ACS data those 18 years and over that speak English less than well, to give us a county by county look at what that need was. So you could see, okay, based upon the counties that I serve, there's a potential number of English language learners in this county that totals this many. Out of this many, how many do I think that I would be able to serve in an IELP program? Based upon that assumption, you get to the funding for your program. And that chart here came out really small, so let me zoom in on here. So top of that chart says that we typically get or are allocated out of our carve-off from the Fed $300,000 for IELTS. I anticipate that that might go up a little bit. It went up last year by almost $60,000. So these amounts are subject to the total amount that we get. Of the IELTS funds, the state can't hold on to any funds for state leadership dollars. We take a flat amount off the top and everything else is pushed out. So while it looks really clean right now, saying, 10 to 25 will be this amount, it might actually be more because we need to make sure that all the funds are being pushed out. So those amounts might be adjusted in the negotiation when you submit your cost proposal. Does that make sense? But the intent is we're trying to look at, because we know that this is an expensive endeavor, that we're trying to look at about $1,000 a student is available for the services that you need in an IELTS. So that's our goal, is try to award at least $1,000 per student for an IELTS program. And we also know that some programs like CDL is more expensive than a CNA program. But again, it's intended to help support all the components that's required in an IELTS. That's been my goal to get that level of funding for you. Okay, we already talked about Appendix A. Any questions about the funding cost proposal, Part 3 of the application? So as you're preparing that, you're looking at, well, how many do we anticipate serving? And if we budget that to about $1,000 a person, and we will serve, that's what you're looking at in creating your proposed budget from. Okay, and to help you with that is, well, how many are in my area? You can look at your ACS data and Appendix A to get a sense for. These are the number with limited English proficiency. But of that, how many do we think that would? So it's not just looking at that number. It's really, of that number, how many will want to go into an IELTS if I'm saying that IELTS healthcare? I wouldn't want to go into healthcare. I don't like blood. Not even. So, okay. Next, we're going really well, right? We're getting through here.
Just a quick question. If you have not done IELTS yet to this point, and you do go ahead and do another proposal, is there a chance, or is it just, or are you just not eligible because you have not had that? It's not part of the program you did that.
That's a good question. Did you hear that question on the phone?
Could you repeat it? It was a little muffled.
Yeah. Question was, if you hadn't provided IELTS Section 243 in the past, and you're interested in doing it now, are you able to submit an application, or would you not be considered for? Is that a summary? Okay. And the answer to that question is, I mean, if you can determine that you're an eligible provider, if you can demonstrate a response to this and it's scored accordingly, then those funds would be allocated to the program. Okay, we talked about the questions being submitted by March 1st. Make sure that if you're using Appendix E or if you're emailing me, that you indicate that this is in relation to this RFP number. This RFP number is different than the 231, so that would help me make sure that this gets on the right FAQ, and I'm not answering it differently than if it was for 231. So we talked a little bit about how to create these forms in Iowa Grants, going into the funding opportunity, making sure that you click on the right year one. You should not be able to see any other one than this. This is the only one that's posted, the only one that's live right now. But make sure that you look at the one that includes in the title July 1, 2020 to June 30, 2025. That's always a good sign. Right now I can see all of them, and I have to make sure that I'm clicking on the right one. So you should only see that when you're looking at funding opportunities. Once you've created and started the application and you need to go back and add more details to it and complete it, it will be in My Applications. So that's where you'll find ones that you're working on. So you'll only find the one that you're currently in under My Grants. So that's how the system keeps it separate. Again, there's documentation attached to that, also resources and websites that might help you in applying for that related to IELTE. The forms there, you'll notice that, again, there's a 6 narratives. All of them are related to Section 243. The budget for 243 is also included. All of those need to be marked as completed. There's no optional ones here where you can just go in and mark it as complete. Once you've opened those up, you'll see all the required questions. As you can see with the asterisks there, that's what it looks like. The response type are typically a text box or an attachment that needs to be included. Don't forget to submit. I know when I first started here, I'd have programs that swore to me that they submitted. Those were renewal applications. It wasn't a competition, so there was less consequences related to not submitting for that. This one, however, there's consequences for not submitting, so make sure that you submit. Evaluation process. Again, these will go before the local boards for their review for alignment with their plans. So boards that have multiple 231, multiple 243, their committee might be looking at several different applications. And that's just something that they'll have to do to make those recommendations. After the local board looks at them and provides recommendations, they're put under for review, and they have to, as indicated, score a minimum of 70%. Cost proposal is also looked at to identify, okay, did you stay within that range of $1,000 per participant, or did you say, look, I need $10,000 per participant because our programs are just that expensive? So what is the good return for the investment that the cost proposal highlights? Negotiations and appeal process. Again, I still have not received an allocation letter from the Fed, so I don't know how much funds we're looking at that will be available for providers. So there will be some negotiation that will have to happen to make sure, one, we don't over allocate, and two, if we do have more money, all of the money that's available is going out to the programs. Okay. If you are awarded, there will be some monitoring and technical assistance, areas of compliance that you'll have to perform. So that will be something that will be reviewed. And if you are doing 231 and 243, I mean, expect that there'll be questions related specifically to 243 that we'll want follow-up on and we'll want information related to. Your IELCE participants will still have to, again, make measurable skill gains. And we are seeing very positive returns in the median wages for those IELCE participants. So of our 231 adult education participants, we're at about $5,400 for a median wage. Of those that are IELCE participants, they're about $9,600. So there's quite a bit of a difference in that. So we're really excited with the outcomes of this. I know that it's a very hard program. It's hard for us to help support you in, but we definitely see that this IET and IELCE are making positive impact. The IET participants aren't as high. They're about $7,200 for a median wage. But again, that's a bump from someone that's just an adult education participant, exits our program, does not do an IET or an IELCE. So we think that both of those routes are an improvement and an advantage for participants. So we do track that, and we expect the information from you as a participant to be able to track that. And one of the ways that employment for second and fourth quarter is done is through data matching, which again means that we rely on the collection of Social Security numbers for that purpose. While the collection of Social Security number is not a required field for them to participate in adult education, it does impede our ability to match them for that information and get that. Just help encourage that they're willing to share that, you're able to better show those kind of results that I just shared with you. So again, this would be a renewable contract based upon your performance. As I said, that we've got some programs in the last 3 years that might have been funded for IELCE that have struggled to use the funds. Reallocation of those funds or shifting of that is not something that we can just, take our 243 funds and make them 231 funds. We can't do that. They have to be spent for the purpose of 243. And if a program's not able to fulfill that agreement, we have to find ways of moving those funds to another provider then. So those would be reasons why in the next grant cycle that we would have to look at, are you able to fulfill your obligation of serving the participants that you indicated that you could? So you set an enrollment target. Are you hitting that enrollment target? Are you expanding that? If you're not, then we as a state, last thing I want to do is ever give money back. We can't afford to give money back. We don't want to give money back. But if we don't spend it for 243, I'm going to be on the hook to give money back. You'll make me very sad, and that will be a bad day. But we need to make sure that we're serving the students using the funds correctly. So if a program commits to that and they're not able to do that, the following year, whether or not a renewal occurs will be based on your ability to do that. So something that we're going to have to pay closer attention to with these funds. Again, we've got the submission deadline of April 3rd, no later than 4 p.m. And we did 74 slides in an hour. All right, I'll take questions.
We will be required to serve all six English as a second language educational functioning levels. Is there more information on that? For example, are we required then to include, say, pre-literacy learners within the pool of students for an IELTS? Do they have the skills that would allow them to do that? Does every class have to have a mixture, be multi-level? Do we have to basically have 6 different classes of IELTS for every different level, or is there any additional information on what that expectation is?
The expectation is that, I mean, they're assessed and they're determined whether or not they're a good fit for that IELTS program. Because again, you could say that you're serving all 6 levels and they're available to get into healthcare, but I don't want to do healthcare. So, I mean, you've made that available to them. It is a program that could accommodate all 6 levels, but whether or not you have participants at all 6 levels will depend upon your pool, those interested, and availability of spots. I would assume that you would have some limit of how many you could serve at a given time. So it was written there so that, again, we're not looking at, we only want an IELTS that's for level 6. It's intended to what needs to be done to be able to serve all levels of ESL participants, but it's based upon what is the need of that workforce training, the IET element. If that requires a bronze level, or requires reading at the 5th grade level, or it requires, in the cases of a CDL, it requires a license, right? So there's other requirements that are associated with that. They would have to meet that. Does that help? Okay. Because one of the other slides that we shared is, again, related to the IETs not being the rarity. It's not a one-off thing, but how do we make that more of a common practice? And there might be some IELTS that are built or adapted to serving those that are at lower levels. So are there, before CNA, is there something that they can do as a CMA that might not require as much math or things like that? So.
And that would meet the industry recognized credential requirement?
CMA is an industry recognized with hospital industries to serve and function in that setting. So. Questions? Are you exhausted? Me too.
We've been talking for how many hours now?
Hours, it seems.
Minute now.
Even for Alex, this is a long day. Okay. Well, I'll stop the recording. And again, these and the slides will be posted by the 21st. Eric, did you get that last question then?
Yeah, it's not.